So let's go ahead and go over then what we've got here based off the release notes. So I'll put these up for right this second, and then if you have a copy of those from DK, you can keep them up on your screen if you'd like. I'm going to move them off the screen, but I'll go through search in 360 and dive a bit into how that works and a little bit of a workflow, and then show the ICA HDX metrics. And those will probably be where we spend most of our time, and then the other ones should be a little bit faster to move through, and then we can have those questions and things like that. So for the search, we'll start off with that, and with just a simple kind of use case. This is the main screen under the Advanced tab. Comes up by default, and you simply enter in a search term here. I'll enter in David, and you can hit enter, press search now. The default is today and yesterday. You can change that time frame up to a maximum of today and 7 days. So we have a little limit on there in the beginning. We'll see if people ask us to open it up. You can do things like 1 week ago, 2 weeks ago, up to 6 weeks ago. So you still get that's a 7-day query, but it's we'll go 6 weeks back. A lot of times in current environments, if you're looking up somebody, today and yesterday may work for you. It depends upon what your use case is as well. So I did it today and yesterday and hit search now, and it starts filling in information ahead right up on the screen right away. And I can start looking through that information right away. I can even click on some pieces of information here and start a drill down process. So again, there's various use cases, so many different people may come in with a use case, and some may have their answers answered right away, and others may have to do more looking. So for instance, if I was looking up David right now, as I did, and I wanted to know what machine he was on, I might be good right now because I see these 4 machines here, and I see what was on one of those 4 machines, or all of those within today and yesterday. If I was curious what that group was that he was a member of, a certain machine group, just off the top of my head, I forgot what it was, maybe I'd have it here and I'd be good to go. Go back into do whatever I was going to do with that machine group. If I was curious one of his user groups, maybe I'd be good to go here. Here's his login times for this morning on these machines. Again, maybe my question is answered. So I can continue to do that and possibly get my question answered here. But the reason we really have a lot of this information up, again, A, maybe you do need a quick answer and that answers it for you. But B, it's a contextual reference. So if I typed in DA and hit search, I'm going to get a lot of different DA somethings. So when I run across a David and I see an ancillary machine name or group or something that ties that back to the search term, I might realize that's the right one I'm searching for. That's the right person, or that's the right variation of a name or partial description that I typed in or whatever. So there's a couple use cases for having this ancillary information. Again, one-off quick answer, and also to help you identify your search term and if it's the right thing you're looking for. So if you were looking for David, his general overall user experience, you could also use another feature we have here, which is a table button on each piece of information that's returned. And what that does is it goes ahead and pulls back some common metrics for that search term. And in this case, user experience based metrics. So if you were curious, the login delay for David, you may have your answer now, and again, you might be done. If you notice here on the right hand side, there's 4 machines that are associated with this David, by the way, and with these metrics here. So this is an average of the experience across these 4 machines. But if you look down further, you've got the username on machines here. Okay, so you see this is just a username basis. This is a username basis plus a machine basis in the inspector. And you notice if I click this table, it's going to go fill the information in with the same types of user experience metrics you saw above. However, they're broken out per machine because the machine basis is on. So now your machine counts are 1111 all the way down, and you've got the actual values that were on those machines, and that rolls up to the numbers you saw above. And that's how that can work all the way down the line. So if you saw something interesting in the process area and you just wanted to know about this Google Earth that was running, you could just click this table right here and the system will go ahead and retrieve that information. And it will do that even while it's searching. So if it's searching for 80, 90 queries, you can still do that and get it to return back. Okay, and then when these tables pop up, of course, you can sort the information, look for something specific. And From here, you could even determine you want a longer time frame on this specific information, adjust that time frame, and then you could hit the refresh, and you'll refresh just this one table for a longer time frame and not have to wait for everything. Okay, so that's a brief overview of how this portion works. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a little bit about the 360 next, and then we'll go into a couple other functions from the screen. So once you search your search term, you look at your ancillary information as your secondary columns. However, you have maybe your answer, or you press a little bit further on one of these specific categories to find an answer. And if you're still needing to dig deeper on something, and I think many of us are going to look for this next option as maybe the default option we use, but you could choose to run a 360 dashboard on the search term. And those search terms that are compatible with that are a username. So you have a user 360 when I click on a user. If it's a machine group, can run a machine group 360. If it is a user group, I can run a user group 360. And I can run a actual machine 360. So there's 4 360s there that have to do with user, machine group. And the last 360 that's available is an application 360. So if I'm looking at an application, and this works even in a table like this, I can run a 360 on that application. And what that does, it turns the focus to the search term that you click on just before you click the 360. And it tells you everything about that search term, and it goes through all the tabs within Stratusphere, just as this search does. And it looks up all the data that's related to that search term and gathers it together in one spot in like a layer cake format. Even the search is returned in a layer cake format to a degree if you keep going down. But the 360s are more specifically focused into more of a layer cake type format. So let's assume I wanted to press further. I needed to find out more information about David. And so I'm going to run a user 360 on David. And it doesn't matter which one I choose. Any David off any of these tables here. All right, and so the 360-degree dashboard for username David is coming up. And with this is actually quite nice. You can actually leave this up on your screen all day with a search term that you entered in. And you could periodically refresh it, change the time to last hour, last 15 minutes, last 4 hours. So if you were trying to keep an eye on something or a group of users or something specific that's been troublesome throughout the day, you could actually leave this up and then click one of the quick tags just to see a specific piece of information or and those tables and that type of thing. So that's kind of convenient. So this is a 360 dashboard for username David. Let's go through it a little bit. You see on the bottom it's actually still running some queries. As those queries fill in, they'll come up to the screen and it will slightly readjust, so note that that does happen. If the tables get out of alignment, they're supposed to readjust themselves. We'll continue to make that better. If they don't, you can resize the screen slightly and then they may redraw right then to the right proper shape and size. So this layer cake, or this 360, starts off with domain overview for username David, because that was my entry point. Shows the domains as an extra basis, the login domain. So I've logged into 2 different domains. Shows the operating system version, SID version, and overall user experience with some interesting counts that kind of help you understand how many times they've logged into that environment, that specific domain on that OS, or how many times that they had, how many machines were virtual, how many machines were physical, how many cores were associated with them. I think on this one down here, I've got some flex apps, so you see my disk count go up higher, right, than just a standard C and something else. These are how long you've been in that domain for, how long you were logged in that domain for. So that's really quite informative when you just look at the first table only, right? So as we go down the list, we can see not only the domains that they have been logging into, but what their actual login times were, and at what time that login occurred, and what machine names those logins occurred. And on the dot release that's going to come out with a service release, there's been 3 or 4 more columns added here already. So that'll be in the next month or 2 when a service release comes out. It'll be just a little richer. And then you can see after they've logged in, what were those desktops allocated? What were the desktop names and what were they allocated? You can see what were the units that were consumed on those desktops, how much of that allocation, CPU wise, megahertz wise, memory megabyte wise. You can see that in percents as well. So if you don't want to go look at the allocated table, you can see if you were approaching an upper limit of something quite easily here without having to run a new inspector view and refresh the screen in inspector. And of course, all these tables are different views in an inspector, maybe the same inspector for some of them, and maybe multiple inspectors. And so what the system has done is gone through all those tabs and pulled back the relevant data and stacked it up here in this layer cake. And if I do a close all on the top of the screen, you can kind of get an idea of all the different views that are listed here. So if you wanted to go down to a specific view like GPU model, you could go right there and view something specific. And these are pretty basic machines, so you're not going to see anything exciting in that category right this second, which might tell you that you need to go add some drivers or pass something through to that guest. But I'll open all again. So on this 360 view, it's meant to kind of give you an overview so you don't have to go touch the system and know where to look to get this information that you might need, and it gives it all to you in one shot, right? And so let's go take a more of a detailed look. We've got consumed desktop units, then percents. We've got the user experience overview broken out by machine, so you can see if one machine or another has a worse or better user experience, or some launch times and queues, of course, network latency you see there. Desktop experience overview table, that actually breaks out the user's experience across all the desktops they were on. So whereas I split them out here, they were split out here for you so you could see a specific user and desktop that might, by machine, that might be experiencing a problem. Now you have the overview, not by machine, just with the user. So this is the average for that user on Wednesday, right? But that consists of 3 machine counts, right? And one day, because Wednesday is just one day. So we continue to go down here. You've got the consumed desktop units on an average. So this is on an average what they consume of what they've been allocated. And again, you've got a machine count there of 3, so you can tell. If I continue to go down, we've got GPU information. Again, not a very rich system to pull GPU information from. That could tell you something as well. Network information, that's inside the guest information. We've got source network and source user. So we got the source user application scene. So this would be the user's name, the applications he reached out and used, right? So this would be from the network station, and it's correlated back, usually a different tab within inspector. These would be the destination IPs that that user, who's the source user, had reached out to. These 2 tables are brought from the stations, and they basically break out the actual applications you accessed, and then they break out the source and destination IPs that you accessed. So let's go ahead and continue down here to remote IP. This is another tab correlated back. Anything that you've accessed with ICA, PCOIP, RDP. If I continue to go down, not only are we showing the general remote display types, but then we're showing any published applications that you might be on if it's a Citrix situation. So you don't have to go. If you're not on any, if there's not any published applications, then this whole table might not show up. So here's the applications. The applications are nice. They're shown here by experience, by machine. So you can see the owner. If it's a terminal server, you can also see the machine name, the application friendly name, the process name, sorted by workload. This is the experience. Then if you go down, it's the same thing, but it's the consumption, the CPU, the memory, the disk, the GPU. So it can be quite nice. Separated out like that. And then when you continue further, you've got the system apps. They're all separated out, so you don't have to fight through the list of stuff that might not be human readable, or you might not want to attribute right now to the user. That's a system application, and you're going to deal with that afterwards. You want to take a look at the user context now. So this is separated out. But again, the machine name is there, the owner's there, and the things that you need to be able to dissect that in a complex environment when the user's on multiple systems and published apps. This is really great because you're getting the application version and the command line arguments that David used over the time frame. Again, it's how all this works. So you can really see inconsistencies across how application versions are using different command lines. And that can help when you're migrating and why something was working before and it's not now. Maybe the command line didn't get changed. Here is David, on these hosts. The ones that I was on that were not my Hyper-V local, I think I was on 5, but the ones that I was on that were not my Hyper-V local are going to show here, right? And so you see the 4 that are hosted by Liquidware that I'm on, running my ICA connections. So these are the virtual machines, these are the hosts, and these are virtual machine level stats from the hypervisor, and then these are host level stats from the hypervisor. And if you continue down, you've got data store, alerts, and then trending information. You've got your last hour trending down to the minute level if you're set to a minute level sample. So it's really nice. It goes back in detail, machine name user, it goes back every minute. If you have a minute level sample, you'll get that resolution. You'll get the lowest resolution shown of the sample time you have set. We could talk about that more later. This is your last 24 hours hourly, your last 14 days hourly. You can compare your last 24 hours hourly if you have all those hours shown, and I only was on for a few hours at that point, I guess. But if you're on for 8 hours, you know, in your last 24, and then you could look at that same 8 hours over a 2-week period and see if it's trending similar. And then you've got a daily view for 30 days daily. So to do all this, to load all these different views, time correlated to the right user, the right machine, pick all the right bases, go to all the tabs, pull it together, it would be a tremendous amount of work. And this just happened in, 77 seconds. And I was able to start looking through as it was happening. If any of this information is good for me, again, I can use a feature that we didn't talk about on the search, but I was going to talk about now, and it also works off the search. So if I liked a certain piece of information here, let's go with these counts right here, domain overview, I could click the pop out right here. So if I was a new Stratusphere user and I went to search and I ran a 360, the most simple thing, I could get a piece of information and go, that looks interesting to me. Somebody might need to know about that. Maybe me, maybe somebody else. Pop out that table, get right to that focused information, and then continue, if I'm an old Stratusphere user, to dig down and drill in, focus on something and change my resolution, increase my time frame, whatever. Or if I'm a novice user, maybe I was just exporting now and I want to type in some information about a ticket number or something I noticed, and then I can export that information out right to an Excel file, send it to you, or if I don't want to touch this file, of course we all know that it goes over to the My tab over here. So I'll have that information now, kind of a workflow there to get something in the system. Somebody else can go up, maybe a manager, somebody else through the system, and go into My tab folder, and then of course look up that ticket number here with the search and pick up that export, right, and open that up. So that's a little bit of a workflow there. So I'm going to pull back real quick up to the top of the search. And start from this point, this perspective one more time, and pull up the same thing that I was doing, David here. But this time, I'm not going to search everything. Since David is a user and I know that, I'm just going to click user. So the search is going to take less time, search through less information. There's going to be a lot less information in there. At this point, again, I could get my answer, or I could press for more information on something that I might just want a simple answer on. And I could press for even more by running a user 360, or as I said before, a machine 360, various user group and machine group 360, or an application 360. So the user, machine group, and user and machine 360s are relatively the same. The machine group information has less information in it, so they've been slightly trimmed back. You may find that you have to go to a user specific 360 for a specific piece of information. The application 360 I want to take another look at because it's not exactly like the other 360s as far as the information it shows. Again, those are relatively similar. So I'm going to launch an Internet Explorer 360, and we'll see what flavors are out there, and we'll see how many users are running it and what some general stats are. So again, this application's being searched now through the areas of the Stratusphere where we see it, and pulled back to one spot, and it's going to be pulling information out by usernames and machines, but we start off with just showing you the total application totals being consumed by all the owners and machines, and then we show you those averages, and we do that down the line here so you get comfortable with the application and the counts that you're looking at. And so starts out with totals by version. So you've got Internet Explorer is running these four versions, and the top version has the most workload, probably because it's the totals and it has the most users associated with it. Okay, and it's using in total about 400 megahertz today and yesterday, and 1.3 gig of RAM, okay, for these 4 users, right? So a real environment is going to be a much bigger number. And then you've got that split out by version, right? But understand, again, these are your totals. So down to the next table, we're showing the averages. So now you've got the same versions split out with the averages are. So you've got your totals for the apps, you've got your averages for the app. Then you've got your averages for the app, but split up by an OS version. So, you know, these are things that you might want and you might not want, but we've gone and run them ahead of time in one swoop. So you don't have to do that. And they didn't probably take much time if you didn't want them. They just ran and presented. We show the totals by day of week then, but we take out the version basis or the version column. So now you're getting a total idea what IE is being consuming, or actually this one is user experience. Well, it's this combination of both, user experience in the front here and consumption over here on the right. So you've got the totals for Internet Explorer there, not separated out by machine or user or version, but then separated out by date. So if you had 7 days here, you could see if you had a higher day than another, more user counts on one day than another. And if you wanted to know this on an hourly level, of course you could pop out to the inspector, get this data up, and switch it to hourly resolution. So you could, you know, easily do that and go from this view to something else and morph it quite easily. So these are the totals by day of week, and then your averages by day of week, in keeping with the same format you saw above. Now we start breaking out, though, by the machines that are running it. So on a terminal server, you could see all the terminal servers running this version, or all the machines running this version of Internet Explorer. And then these are consumption stats. They're not launching stats and things like that. They're more consumption stats per machine. If I look to the right, I can see the owner count. So I can see how many owners on that machine had that application running, which is a very nice piece of information. And at these owner hours, these will add up to much more than your current time frame that you're scanning, based on how many owners are running the app in that time frame. So if you were, you know, if you had a user using it for 24 hours, but it was 3 users using it for 24 hours, and you were only looking at, you know, yesterday, a 24-hour day, you might have, you know, 72 appear there because you have 3 for full 24 hours. You'd be like 72 active hours. Well, that's total active time of that app. Then you've got it broken out by owner, but it starts with experience, okay? So you've got more, not consumption metrics here, more tagged to the experience by owner by version. Continuing on, we will show you the consumption by the machine and the owner now. So this is combined. So it really gives you the ability to look at it on a VDI, on a physical, or on a terminal server without having to think about what you're doing and maybe doing something and getting something back you didn't expect. We will break out the command lines here. Very helpful between the versions to see if there's something different in a new version you've installed, or if it's actually, that's more on the command line arguments, what I'm referencing there. But the same thing could apply on the version path-wise as well, where it's coming from, where it's being loaded from. If you wanted the command line and the version on the same line, you'd simply pop out to the inspector. And once you got to the inspector here, you would go to the bases, which are these first columns over here pretty much, right? And you'd add your command line arguments in, and it would blow these rows up by many more rows, right? Because each one of these could have many different command line arguments. Now I can see the command lines on there, okay? So I'll close that out. You've got the different versions of IE that have run in general from inventory, no matter what the time frame, and the last time it was seen. So you can go ahead and sort through those. Okay, so that could be very helpful to try to understand the version and how it's been out in the wild. And then we end, just like the other dashboards, the 360 dashboards, with the trending information. This is the last hour for that app, and those owners, of course we use the owner on the machine, could be a terminal server, might not be, and then over your 1 minute intervals if you're set up like that for an hour. And then of course we dive into the 24 hours hourly, the 14 days hourly, and the 30 days daily, giving you a chance to compare what your yesterday was on some hour specifically and what your typical 2-week average has been on that hour. So that is pretty much the overview that I have for you on 360 and on search and on 360 rather. All right, so I'm going to switch over to an inspector. I'm going to switch over to the remote display inspector. I'm going to go to the default view, which we all know if you're lost in inspector, you go to the top left and you click custom, or click here, click to set default view. So once you start changing things in inspector, this will change to that custom up there. And then if you want to go back to the default, you click this and it goes back to the default. So this is the default remote display inspector. And we're going to look a little bit at the ICA metrics right now. And so at the top left of the screen under summary, under HDX, and if we just click HDX, it'll grab the top entry. That's how this works. If we just click summary, it grabs users. If we just click HDX, it grabs overview. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the overview, which is going to add a filter to look at just ICA. And so it also turns on a bunch of different bases up here under ICA metrics. And so these bases, they enable some extra information that comes over about your connect and how you connected to the session at the initial session start time. So what happens here when we go to this view is we turn on protocol, graphic mode, session start, kind of these first 3 columns here. And then we machine, we expose that right away. And then the basic columns here for the ICA information, the basic information that we're checking for: session information, client information, network information, SD-WAN info, Windows Media Flash info, are you using legacy graphics, DCR, or thin-wire graphics info. So these are info kind of buckets that we're going to be pulling from. And they're not going to always have information every minute. They're going to have information every time you connect to a session. They actually fill. I think they are sending data over every SID time now. Not sure, but I think it's the same information that when you connected initially, that was your connection information. So that may change over time slightly. But regardless, these turn on the special ICA HDX information. And to get that turned on again, it's just much simpler to go right up here and to pick the view. The view is going to go turn those on, set some filters for you, and change your graph and table. And so from the tables, it picks from these tables here under protocol, HDX, HDX details, and so on here. You've got these tables. Using them through this main view up here, and then using the yes links on the front of the screen here can be quite easy and effective. Okay, so the overall view I'm showing you starts off with the time frame that's set up default in your preferences. So I'll do it today right now and take a look at who's connected for today. I see David connect for today on ICA with 2 graphic modes, 2 session start times. The initial time the session started. If I disconnect and reconnect, that does not increment this number. If you re-log in to a whole new session, then this number changes. Let's look up today and yesterday. A little more records information returned. Okay, we've got 12 rows now. So again, we see David here logged on yesterday and available. The goal of this screen is to show you what methods the user able to connect to Citrix with and which one did they actually connect with. So with Citrix HDX, there's a number of different functions and features rolled into that HDX bundle, and they were layered in over time. And Citrix had policies to enable or disable those functions, and it got really confusing, like a hodgepodge, as to which function were you using, which feature were you using to get this special graphics quality that you wanted. Either high quality, you didn't care about speed, or low speed issue, so you didn't really care about quality as much, you just wanted it to refresh faster. And so there were different protocols, and then there were operating system requirements or minimums so that certain things wouldn't work on newer operating systems, so you were stuck with older protocols, regular ICA, which is great but not supported today because there's certain subsystems not available in Windows 10 and whatnot, so you can't even use it anymore. So even though it's kind of better than some of these other ones, even in some ways, you can't use it anymore. But these other ones are advancing, and they're either high quality, like in DCR's version, or they're they could be lower quality, a little bit lossy, but very good on low bandwidth, like H.264 ThinWire. But they all have different advantages, disadvantages. You know, you've got higher CPU utilization maybe with one mode of ThinWire, and a low mode of CPU utilization on the host, but more on the client with another mode of ThinWire. DCR, you've got, you know, more on the endpoint, and legacy, you've got issues maybe on the host. So there are different possibilities, and HDX rolled a bunch of these different possibilities because you have all these different environments, and who knows what you're going to need to connect at in different environments for quality or for quantity. And so they've given you these options, and including SD-WAN, which is another available option to help dedupe packets if you have a certain enterprise version, and if for a basic version, it can help load balance, like if you're going to use your certain types of communication lines or new internet types of communication lines. And it can split even the protocol and say, I'm going to send screen and video across this older communication line, which is very reliable, and I'm going to send printing and something else across the internet, which is bursty, a lot faster maybe sometimes, but not as reliable, but I don't care. So it can split it across those. So SD-WAN's pretty cool. So this shows you, when you turn on all these bases or coming with the view, all of these different choices that you might have had available at your fingertips that you've deployed out there. And then you've gone and deployed all these and set policies to which ones are available. And now your clients are logging in from who knows where, any different endpoint, their browsers, their hotels, their phones. They're logging in from laptops, maybe known endpoints where we know certain protocols like Direct3D is going to fly. But maybe there are other endpoints where we know Direct3D is not going to fly. It's a kiosk, it's locked down, it's an old Win95 endpoint or something, and it's going to have to use legacy graphics, or it's going to have to use ThinWire host mode generated, which is CPU on the host sending screen kind of refreshes out to the client because it just can't handle downloading the ThinWire directly to it with the endpoint mode of ThinWire, the deep compression mode, or it can't handle giving it DCR. So you're going to wind up getting... So you get all these tools, you get all this great Citrix stuff, you get all this ability to tailor it for your environment, you tailor it out there, but then you don't know where your users are really going to log in from possibly. So you don't really know, why isn't it working as expected? Why am I not getting high quality? Or why is my server CPU seem so high and not my endpoints? Or why am I constantly getting legacy graphics? And that has to do with, did you have the right Citrix client version? Did you have available the ability to run Direct3D in your guest, or ThinWire in your guest? Did you have the right, did the guest agent turn that functionality on in Citrix because it realized the guest had the appropriate 2 CPUs available and whatnot? So the Citrix ICA client, when it boots up in the guest, in both areas, in the virtual machine and the VDA side and on the endpoint, both determine what modes it thinks it's going to be available to negotiate with. And then based on that, enables or disables those modes. Now, whether those modes are active or not is another story. So what we've done is we've tabulated all the possible modes that are available for you here. And then we've put a column on the left-hand side that says graphics mode, and it shows which one you're using. So in this case, DCR is available for this user, David, down here at 8:35:50 for a session start time. So is Legacy, so is ThinWire. And I have a clue here. I've got ThinWire FPS, so he's probably using ThinWire. And he is, because if I go to the left, it's H.264 ThinWire. ThinWire H.264 available. Graphic mode H.264 ThinWire. Your client rendering on the client side with deep compression. Or you are on H.264 comp with an underscore comp, ThinWire Plus, which is hosted rendering. Currently, we're using H.264, not H.264 comp. You'll see that if you do a longer date range here, where we set the servers to run in compatibility mode, where they process on the host server CPU and send out screens, versus deep client, where it goes out to the endpoint where the CPU would render. So in this case, if with this short time frame, it's in regular mode, not comp mode. And so you see H264 on the left. It's using H264. I can confirm by going into the yes. That's going to switch the table for me over to a thin wire table. I'm going to be able to scroll over there. I'm going to see that, yes, on this session start time, these are all the same session starts, I was active. So I'm using thin wire. So it's present, doesn't mean it's active. It means it's present, but maybe it can't run. It's valid and it's active. It's running. And you'll see inactive here on the other modes that were available. So on Direct 3D DCR, it's going to do the same thing. It's going to pop me out, switch me to the appropriate table for DCR. I'm going to switch to the right over here. It's inactive. Okay. I'm going to go to Legacy Graphics Mode just to confirm, because I maybe think it is really running that. Nope, it's present, but it's inactive. If it were active, it would be running Legacy Graphics Mode, and it would allow caching. It'd be running at lossy compression level 2. And then if some other values here, might be important to you, like if it's going to degrade the color depth first or not, and some of the other priorities and whatnot. So same thing with these other, you can click and it will open that information for you to the right hand side there. It's a little bit easier. You can see my remote IP right here. Okay. Any other information that might have been showing through if it was an internet client or what. So I'm going to close this off. You're back to this overall screen, which was the entry point. I could also focus on a specific session start time for a user by clicking it and focusing it. Right now I'm just looking at that session start time. Right, and if I could be at this session start time, I could go down to, if I wanted to, a SID level and just go right down to this session start all the way through this one session and all of its metrics that I can see. And then if you notice here, you entered in with a filter. So if I was looking for granular information that I don't think I see here, and I thought I was logged on for more time, I could clear this filter out, and then more information may show through that aren't necessarily pertaining to the direct connect modes, right, to keep the graph clean. In this case, there was no more time that I was on for. But if there was, keep in mind, once you're in here and you're filtering down to show certain things on this graph, you may filter out some records. You want to understand that if you're looking for detailed at a SID level or something. Okay, and so there are some views here under ICA HDX. You can go and switch these individual views. I believe that if you're not sure which one of these views you want, it's going to be the first overview pretty much always, or it's going to be the details. Give me the mother load. Give me everything you've got. The reason I say that as well is because on some of these right now, I believe when you click them, I think the sorts are accidentally reversed. So if you click by Flash, it gives you all the no's of Flash first and then all the yeses. So you might not see anything. You have to click the column and resort it the other way. Keep that in mind. The mother load of information, the details, what that does there is it gives you pretty much all the columns that we've pulled back with the Citrix information in one shot and kind of groups them together. So encryption, session information, client information, session reliability, SD-WAN. Oh no, this is network information, how you connect it at, multi-stream or port numbers, SD-WAN information. We're not using it right now. We were earlier and had some information, but right now in this time frame we haven't been. What compress rates we might have seen and line speeds. There is a section for legacy here, graphics, and a section for DCR. Most of the DCR information that we're receiving back, there may be some good bytes on wire information in here. Thin wire information, this is not a thin wire user. Notice it's DCR in the graphic mode, so you've got nothing here. It's inactive and there's just nothing, right? And then if you continue on, you can see some of the possible information you'd have there. It's kind of nice. So if it's yes, that mode is available. This is the primary piece, okay? Obviously there's a lot maybe here, but this is the primary piece. It's these few columns right here, and this one piece of information only, graphic mode. If you only knew that, you'd know a lot. What way are they connecting to me? Other than that, you're looking at frames per second, which you know what that is. You're looking at kbps on the total IO, the audio, you know what that is. Maybe idle minutes per SID, that's a new thing, how many minutes they were idle per SID record. But that's pretty self-explanatory. So the most important thing is, what are the graphic mode that you're in? And the way to tell that is to determine, well, what mode was available, and it's got a yes in it, and then was it active or not, and you click the yes and go look for active or not. But you don't have to even do that because it says DCR right here, so you know it was active. So most of the time, you're going to use this to determine what modes were available and what mode did I connect at. Yes, you've got to then go look on the Citrix blogs and determine when I can't connect, what are the minimum requirements for thin-wired H.264. And then if you see it's like 2 processors on the client, and it's a certain guest operating system, it's a certain this or that, then you're going to know, well, what version of the operating client, Citrix client did I have? Because there's a minimum version of that. What version of the feature release did I have? There's a minimum version of that, not shown here. What version of the operating system do I have? There's a minimum version of that. So that's really the core of this. Hope that helped a little bit on what to watch out for with the Citrix metrics, because there are a bunch of them, but those are the core ones. Okay, so this is the session ping and jitter view. Under summary on the top of the screen, it will go ahead and change your bases and things like that because it's under summary. It's not gonna, like all these down here, as you know, most of them keep your bases and time frames and stuff, but these summary ones, they switch things up on you. So if you go under session ping and jitter, it sets up the bases appropriate and a filter in there. It looks for any time there is a dest ITR or a dest count of 1 or anything greater than 0, and it pulls up that record knowing that that's a trace route record.
Yeah, so David, let me just give a quick overview. In terms of what we've got in 585, you have for these trace routes to work, this is specifically where you have the SID key properties, and I might go through that later on. You have to have a connector ID key installed on the client, on the remote client, to be able to get the right trace routes. And then you've got to tell the SID key to be able to say, automatically detect RFX, RDP, ICA, HDX, PCRIP. The SID key will generate those trace routes, and if you think about it, the SID key on the remote client has pretty much got nothing to do with the SID key that's on the inside of a virtual desktop, right? We have to be able to connect those two. If there is no SID key on the remote client, we are not going to get you any trace routes. But if there is, then we'll try and make sure that we have the right IP and we lock onto the right IP, and that's how you'll see this information here. So we have data within that gives you, the number of hops that are visible from the remote client to the end client, what was the latency for each hop, the IP address, and the DNS names. We're going to expose that in this month's release. But the ping and the jitter values, that means, because trace routes sometimes take more time in the background, we're doing trace routes only once per callback. So on the remote client, the connector IDs call back to the hub at whatever frequency. If they detect a remote desktop session for any of the protocols that we're interested in, it'll do a trace route only once for that callback period. However, each sampling period after that, we will be able to do pings to the virtual desktop, and we'll calculate the jitter. So a ping is basically going from point A to point B, how much was the time, and the jitter is the time in difference between each pings that we saw. So the longer the pings, that's the longer the latency, the higher the jitter. That means it's inconsistent in terms of the network latencies are going up and down, and that kind of is a bad sign because that causes mouse movements to not be as smooth and stuff like that. So that's a brief overview in terms of what the trace routes need. Of course, you have to be aware that firewalls anywhere in between are always a problem. So if you're not seeing any trace routes, you'll have to check firewall policies as well. But for each of those, you're going to get a minimum, average, maximum in terms of pings and jitters. And like I said, we have the individual hop numbers, latencies, IP addresses, and DNS names of each hop in a trace route. It's just that we didn't quite get to it. It's in the database. It will be exposed soon. Sorry, David.
Perfect. Awesome. Yeah, this is going to be enhanced. So now at this level, you're at least able to see how many hops were visible. So we may have a certain amount of hops that we think there was on an average. So if we can't detect all the destinations, but we may even show like 30 hops here, because I think that's the maximum that we'll detect if we can't like resolve anything. But then the visible hops might be 3. So we might have 30 hops. Like, we know there's something there extra that's going across. We can't resolve it. It's not letting us resolve it. It's the firewall rules, whatnot. So we know there may be, up to 30 there, but we were able to see X. And then so that's kind of helpful. We'll be able to then click that number, hopefully, right there. And a pop-out would come out. And that pop-out would show the first ping, the second ping, the third ping, and then the DNS names down the line. So let me click one of these for a moment and focus on him, and see if I have something here that's more granular even for you. So yeah, that's more of a high resolution of, through that time frame, what these actual average hop times were to the destination, and of course the max ping that's in there and the max jitter. If you look over to the left here, you'll see that it was this user at this session start on this remote machine, same one, from this IP, that's accurate, to this VM inside the cloud or inside the on-prem environment. This traceroute function is an endpoint function, basically. At this point, that's really all you're going to... Now, if the user's in a VM passing through to another Citrix session, then that VM becomes the endpoint, basically. And if there's an if we have a client on there, then you'll get a trace route from that VM as the endpoint to the host it's remoting to. But essentially right now, this functionality is restricted to people with an endpoint SID. So we really covered search in 360s and a little bit of diving to the inspectors with that, and then export, and then we covered ICA metrics and looking at the graphic mode and what's available pretty much is really the keys to those. And then, we did a little bit of the ping and jitter overviews of the total ping and jitters to that connection per connection, which definitely can be helpful in understanding why you might have had a bad user experience, and you can sort that by time, and you can get that what time was that the worst, as you saw me go into a SID level there and even here. So you could see, yes, at that time, you probably had a poor experience. You had a really horrible ping max. And then on the list, I also had the high resolution metrics and the process level GPU and some browser PID stuff. So why don't I dive right in then to the detailed metrics for a user. So I'm just going to start from the user inspector. I'm going to grab a first user I see, which is Joseph, and click him. So let's do that. Okay, so he's got something for today. Must have logged off recently. So 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, he must have logged off. So anyway, here's Joseph at 3 o'clock in the morning. Let's go ahead and click that. Pretend we were looking for 3 o'clock in the morning specifically. What you're going to see here is typical. 3 SIDs. The callbacks were roughly 10-minute callbacks. Boom, boom, boom. An 8-minute and a 10 and a 10. So at this point, if I want to know, he had, such a high memory usage at the top of the at this top row here. Maybe I want to know more about that. Now, memory doesn't change as quickly as CPU, and so we may want to look at some of the other ancillary columns. But at this point, let's take a look at these records in more detail. So I'll enable high resolution. Now, this only appears if you're at SID level, and when you click it, now you've got more than 3 SIDs on your screen. And you can actually, sometimes you actually see some. I was looking at one of Matt Boyagin's the other day, and with just a couple SID records, it was, boom, boom, boom. It was almost the same, similar. But once I went to high resolution mode, I saw this interesting trough that appeared, and this lower user experience here that happened, and it really looked different. So it was interesting to see. So now, as you notice, there's not just 3 records that come back. There's 23 records now. So I'll go ahead and shrink the graph for a moment. Gives me my scroll bars nice and easy to get to. And so I can see that, let's sort it by the SID time. It's sorted by user experience, so you won't see the minutes roll down. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. This is a per minute now resolution. And so we see that we're getting an 86, an 88 rather, a 92, a 92, a 92, a 92, a 91, a 91. What this tells me is that we're at a 2-minute sample resolution right now. The reason you have 4 here might make you think you're at 4-minute sample resolution, but if you looked over here, your page faults changed. So your kbps changed. So really, you're at a 2-minute sample, and what we're doing is you were on for both of these minutes here. So we took that one sample over 2 minutes and busted it up. If you were only on for one of these 2 minutes, we would not bust it over 2 minutes and show the extra minute. So we did add the GPU. This is actually very powerful. It does it at a process level. There's not a lot of good stuff to look at right here, right now. We all don't run a lot of GPU heavy stuff in the environment here as well. When I do run things, sometimes I see some really good amount of GPU utilization. I just did a quick video yesterday and used the new Camtasia. And so let's just take a quick peek at what it used for like today plus yesterday. And the GPU metrics we're getting, they are, it's OpenGL and DirectX, and so it's whatever we can identify that went through and used that software engine, okay? So that's why it works on machines that don't have a physical GPU. Yeah. As long as they have a real software emulated GPU, and that's not Microsoft Basic Virtual Display Adapter. That one does not do it right. It's not a virtual soft GPU. So yeah, this works pretty good. I think really, and what we're going to find out here is if these applications are using a soft GPU, they're obviously taxing the system more and not having as best performance as they could be having. There are definitely use cases to consider this. Anybody who uses this app into a pool that uses a GPU-enabled pool. And if they're business apps and line of business apps, or depending upon their criticality, or apps that are often in regards to tickets with low user experience, you can really build a business case then, understanding their usage of this GPU, and that, yes, they probably are experiencing poor results, and build that business case. And possibly also see what's been taxing a CPU or other things, interrupts in your system, because this number may be high even while other things are low. So it's still a very interesting number to use, and I'd encourage you to use it as much as possible right now. I think you're one of the only ones out there who have this available in the product out there today. So let's switch to browser and check out the IE consumption metrics. So it's a new view under Summary and then Consumption IE, and specifically only works for IE right now. So you want to get a summary of the consumption of the IE browser, and it will go ahead and open the right bases for you, which are the type, so we can find IE, and the domain name, so we open the most minimal thing. You're going to want to know where somebody went, not the title or something which might blow up, hundreds of rows on one domain name. So you can see that right off the bat. I've got Amazon.com. I might be using 9 megahertz on that. Somebody might be. Let me go down a little further here, something more interesting. Let's put a little more time frame up on this. Let's do today plus 7 days, so we get a little bit more data. Let's take a look here. Here's a big GPU consumer. So I might know right off the bat that this SAS app, for instance, is an app that may ding me once in a while. FishGL, this is the CPU I've been using as well as the GPU. Not much in the kernel space. That makes a lot of sense. These are the memory I've been using for that website. So general overview like this, if you go into apps and look up these PIDs, they'll look way smaller on the usage for IE, way smaller, but this focuses down to the PID. So once you start drilling down in apps, getting all the way down to a session time, getting all the way down to the level where you're allowed to turn PIDs on, then these numbers line up and you're like, wow, no kidding, that web browser used that much usage. So Everything else remains the same in here, by the way. You know, you can click into something, turn the tab title on, and do all the stuff that you've always been able to do there. So that's really all I have right now for search in 360s, ICA metrics, trace route and ping, the high resolution, process level GPU, and then browser to PID consumption metric now. So, all right, so we cover those basic things, and I hope it really gives you a lot of kind of tools in your tool belt, and also a shot in the arm for some of these accounts that you might have went into before, didn't have something like search available or a 360, and the ability to mass gather information at just fraction of the time and then look through what's important to you, pop to inspector, the additional workflow with the user and machine inspectors to apps and pulling the right graphs and tables and making it easier to use, and of course the improved metrics on remote display, really the whole additional ICA connect modes available and what you connect it at. And then, you know, having process level GPU is just unlike anybody else out there. So anyway, thank you very much. And if there's more questions, please see the release notes at www.liquidwarelabs.com. Thank you.